so let's kick it off. Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a great reInvent so far. My name is Anya, and this is Darren.
Hello.
And we are here today from MongoDB. I lead the GRC team there, so you will see this acronym a few times throughout our chat today. And what that stands for is governance, risk, and compliance. At MongoDB, our main product is a database, so in my world, when we're talking about governance, risk, and compliance, it's usually focused around information security. And I was actually one of the first compliance hires at Mongo in April of 2019. So I've really had the joy over the past couple of years to build our GRC program and team from the ground up.
Yeah, and I joined last April, the information security team with a focus on cloud. And I've been building on AWS for the past decade, which is crazy. And I've worked in regulated industries such as HIPAA and for a biometric identity company.
Yes, and we are both so excited to be here today to talk to you about one of my favorite topics and something I think about every day, and that is customer trust. So I know people are starting to use that word more. You might have started seeing it around more, but it still kind of can have like a vague feeling. What did you think it was when you first heard it?
Honestly, I wasn't quite sure. I mean, I knew it was important, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it.
Yeah, it's true. As we were really talking about this and putting this together, what I realized is that it's really hard to give a very specific definition when something has so much connection to actual feeling. So we're going to give it a try anyway. But when you think about why customer trust is so important, just think about trust in general. It has a very big impact on how you interact with anything. So that's going to be true for your human relationships, but it's also true for how you make purchases. When do you start to get uncomfortable online?
I guess anytime I see the domain as .biz or accepts cryptocurrency.
Yes, I could feel that, but as you see, it's like those are the types of things that might slow you down or might prevent you from making a purchase or sharing your information. So whenever you're sharing something that you value, there needs to be a level of trust there. So all right, here are lovely faces again, and we're gonna take just a few seconds to set you up with a roadmap of how we'll spend our time today. So really what we'll talk about is we'll get a little bit more into what customer trust actually means and why it's important. Then we'll look at how it shows up specifically within the technology industry. And then we'll dive a little bit deeper and talk about how you can leverage your GRC and information security functions to help build and maintain that trust.
I'm also really excited for the example that we came up with, this fictional example. No spoilers, but it involves mind control.
Darren.
I'm sorry.
All right. But we are very excited to share our time with you. So what is customer trust? The reason that it is so important, I think people should talk about it more, is that it's something that's very hard to earn. You have to be consistent, and it's going to take some time. However, it is very easy to lose. I actually just experienced this recently where I was talking with one of my girlfriends. She's in the process of buying a house, and she was telling me how she got an email from her real estate agent, and she opened up the attachment, and they had sent her someone else's mortgage. So, and the first thing she said after that was, how am I supposed to feel comfortable about what he's doing with my information? And I think that's a very good way to look at it. Is it can be just a small thing, or it can be just a quick second, and you really can set yourself back in the trust, which is why it's so essential to think about how to maintain that. All right, so we've talked a little bit about what customer trust means to us. And we want you to also take a minute to think about how does this show up for you in your universe. So one place that I think we can all talk about together is the food industry. So we're all consumers. We all buy some type of food, and it's always been an essential commodity. So we wanted to show a timeline. We're really going to be focusing on customer trends and how they impact. So I know that food commerce happened before the 1900s, but for our purposes, we'll kind of start there. So if you think about the 1900s, the population was growing. You started to see commercial farming pop up, which led to supermarkets, and prices were going down. And people were really caring about quantity over quality. And that continued. So those trends continued in the 60s. You started to see fast food restaurants pop up. You started to see prepackaged food within the grocery store. And that continued even further to just more processed foods and things like microwaves inside your home. Well, what also showed up in your home was chronic diseases. So that ended up causing quite a shift in what customers were looking for within the food industry. So nowadays, we're much more informed about the impact of food on our bodies. And so our concerns have shifted, and you're going to find more people that are looking for things that are organic, perhaps, or maybe sustainably sourced. I know I have a lot of friends, they also happen to do CrossFit. I don't know if there's a connection, but they eat a lot of keto diets. And it's like they get these really expensive prepackaged meals delivered to their house.
Just last week, the day before Thanksgiving, my cousin was tasked with bringing strawberries and cream for dessert, and she sent her poor husband out to 4 different grocery stores to try and get organic strawberries in particular. But we did get it, so it was good.
I really support that. I try to look inside myself, and the most embarrassing thing that I do is I buy healthy pizza rolls. And I actually did some Googling to see the cost of a Tostino's pizza roll, and I'm pretty sure I pay like 800 times the price.
Yeah, but is it worth it?
Oh, it's so worth it. But this is also how customer trust comes in. So when you have consumers like me that are willing to pay more for something, then we're also going to want stronger confirmation that the product that we're buying is what it says it is. So how do I know that these pizza rolls are actually healthy? Great. All right. Hopefully this sounds better. So how do you do that?
Let's get this together. 1, please. Excuse us, technical difficulties. Dion, 1, please. Check, check. Check, check.
Is it easier if we talk loud?
Yeah, do project. Just project.
Okay.
But
There's something going on. There's a gremlin in this room for some reason.
One. 4.
Do we pass it?
Nope, he's fine.
All right. Great. All right, everyone. So hopefully you can even hear my booming voice some more. So where do we live off? My very, very important pizza rolls. All right. So I do really stand by these. Definitely also got them from an Instagram ad. But all right. So how do I know that these things I'm paying for are truly organic? Well, certifications. So certifications in this context are essentially independent third-party validations that you're meeting some sort of base standard. So for example, these are all things that, as are listed here, are going to help assure quality because they're validated by a third party. They're going to help prevent fraud, and they can also promote commerce. So if you keep with our food industry example, you have a regulatory body such as the FDA, and they're going to say, hey, you're required that your labeling is accurate, right? So you can have a great organic product and your labeling is accurate because you're following the laws. But to really make your customers know that and feel comfortable, one thing you could do is go to a reputable organization, so something like the USDA, and they'll come certify that your product is meeting their standards, and then they'll allow the use of their label on your product. So that's going to make it much easier to show.
You know, all this food labeling talk is making me hungry.
I know, I agree. Let's keep it going. All right. So hopefully that is like an example that everyone here can relate to, and you can start to feel that importance of customer trust. And when we're talking about technology, a lot of the times what your customer is sharing with you is their data or their information. And so within the technology industry, when it comes to customer trust, the biggest concern is information security.
So there's a very good reason that security is so important in our technology industry. We operate in a commercial environment where information is more than simply an asset, it's a currency that can be traded. It is used to build, sustain, and grow businesses worldwide.
Yeah, and what does that mean? I feel like how how can something like a simple data point become something that's so valuable that people are, wanting to have it and wanting to steal it? So if we walk through an example, if you just have one single isolated data point, so assume that that is the fact that I, as an individual, streamed one specific song on a music provider, right? Doesn't really add much value to the music provider on its own. However, imagine you knew 1 million people listened to that song. All right, now you're starting to get information. And you can use that information and start to look for patterns. So now I can look at what other songs are these same users listening to. And when you start to analyze your information, that's when it starts to shift towards actual intelligence. And when I feed all of this into a recommendation engine, what I might get out is a new playlist that's customized for me, and it's gonna have new songs on it that I've never heard, but I'm probably gonna actually enjoy. And so now you've used that individual data point to actually create something of value for your consumer.
I mean, I know this is a privacy talk, but I really don't want people knowing how many times I've listened to Taylor Swift's new album.
I don't think you need to tell anyone, Darren. It's a different talk.
That's fine.
But if you think about it, in our present day economy, more and more data is being stored online, whether that's through the use of cloud products or through online transactions. And so as that data increases and becomes more valuable, this also starts to be a target for malicious actors. And that's why you'll see that technology products are often the subject of that threat. All right, so we love visual representations of data no matter how horrifying they are. So as you can see, over time, the size and frequency of breaches has started to increase.
By the way, these are not MongoDB breaches at all.
We're
not on this slide whatsoever.
We are not on there. But it is scary to look at the numbers. And so we took a look at a year, and the numbers were, there was billions of records, actually billions, that were stolen within 1 year. And when we looked at 2020 alone, there were over 3,000 publicly reported breaches.
So this hits pretty close to home because I flew into Vegas on Sunday, and I was in Vegas for about 6 or 8 hours before I got a text message saying that my card had been used fraudulently and they closed my account. So I've been here in Vegas with no credit card.
Yes, and I have been buying dinners in Vegas this whole time, so it's been great. But it is important, and I think that, not every breach will break you, but if you have one major public incident, it can do enough, it can do a lot of damage for you.
So here's some more technology-specific trends that show a decrease in consumer trust in the technology industry as a whole. With increased media coverage, consumers are, fearful of being hacked, and it's no longer possible to ignore the importance of customer trust. The best way to build and maintain trust is to leverage compliance frameworks,
to implement strong security controls and tailor them as you grow.
Heyo.
Is that too much?
Yeah, but I guess we should go. Anyway.
All right, let's keep doing it. All right, so our team, so again, just to remind everyone, I'm from the GRC team at MongoDB, and Darren is on the information security team. And both of us report to the CISO, which I think is the perfect sister, brotherhood, siblinghood pairing. And that is because even though our teams have very different functions, we are actually critical to the success of each other.
Oh, all right, too much. Stop.
I know, but now I'm really committed to it. So here is a little bit more detailed side-by-side view of what I mean by how our teams can complement each other. Now, I know it's a lot of text, so I don't, want to overwhelm. But what we're trying to show is, kind of highlight some of the responsibilities from each team. But to boil it down even more, one way to think about it is once you select a compliance framework, you're going to immediately have something that's a baseline that's based on industry best practices. It's a great place to start, and it gives you a really solid footing. And then as you continue to develop your program, you're going to do things like perform control monitoring, and you're going to be able to do risk assessments. And so all of that feeds into the information security team that they're able to use for a strategy.
Yeah, so on the information security team, we take the output of the GRC team, which would be information security assessments or control monitoring, and we use that to inform our strategy.
Exactly. And then certifications are a great way to communicate that security posture externally. So when you want to have conversations with your customers, it's much easier to have that validation because you have something that is actually verifying that you are doing what you say you're doing. And so it's really benefit. You'll have a more secure product and you're able to increase your revenue or perhaps lower your customer acquisition cost. And the other key thing about certifications is that in some industries, they're actually required. So they're almost like a license to do business. And so you have to really think about what you need to be competitive in the market. So think about industries like the financial industry or the healthcare industry or government sales.
And another thing to keep in mind is that as your business grows and your customer base grows, you're going to get additional attacks, cyber attacks against your company. And it's important not only to have that compliance foundation, but to leverage those needs to strengthen your security posture.
Yes, absolutely. So how do we work together to make this happen? Well, it's a little tough to talk about security and GRC strategy because it really does need to be specific to your company, your product, your industry. But I thought the best way to kind of look at this together is through a maturity model. So that's what you see up here. And if you look at it, when you're in the initial stages, you're going to be using a lot more resources to cover a little bit less ground. That's all of that work that it takes to set something up and kind of actually get your baseline. But as you continue to repeat that and you focus on improvement, you really should start focusing on what does my product actually need? How can I structure these controls and leverage these requirements to do what I want with my security strategy? And it's really, I will actually go into an example. So in our awesome fictional company, you'll kind of see how they start out and then what types of issues they address as they grow. But the key thing to keep in mind right now is it's just important to know where you are here, because this is going to be one of the main factors that drives how you make decisions. So your strategic decisions, your priorities, and your choices will be different depending on where you are on the scale. And then the other key things to always keep in mind are all those other elements. How many resources do you actually have available? What is required in your industry to be competitive? And what's your financial strategy? Are you needing to make a profit? Do you have a lot of cash? Like, those are all important elements.
So another really important thing to keep in mind is that these audits are not one-time asks. I remember the first time I was involved with one of these audits, and it was definitely phrased to me as like, this is a one-time thing, but it really was not.
It's true. I actually remember people's faces when we took them through our first audit, and they realized that they were going to have to do it again, and it was great. But it just shows you that's where you are in the maturity scale. So at the beginning, it's going to feel more painful, but as you continue to optimize and progress, you're going to be able to use less resources to cover more ground. All right. It is time for our example. Darren, are you ready?
I am ready.
All right. So let's do it. Now, I just put this up here because I know it's been a little bit hard to keep track of time lately. So wanted to level set. We're all here together in 2021. And I know you've just met me and we haven't spent a lot of time together, but I hope I've won maybe just a little bit of your trust that you might be willing to come on a little trip with us, and we're gonna travel into the future. All right, ready? Whoosh. Oh, sorry, this is the wrong thing. Whoosh. That's why we're a good team, all right? Hey, did you make it?
I'm here.
Yay, all right, hey, don't leave me hanging, please. Okay, thanks. So, I hope everyone else also was able to make it here to lovely 2077. So here, touchscreens are a blast from the past. Driverless cars are no longer as popular as they used to be, and the human brain can process 100 times more information than it used to. So this was making screens become completely out of style, and people started to look for other ways to add convenience to their lives. So the shortest route to execute this is to just cut out devices completely and go directly into the computers within us, which is our brains. And so this started the age of the Internet of Thinking. Now, this is where MindTech comes into play and control. So MindTech is a small technology company, but they have created a top-tier mind control device. So what they do is they access their customers' real-time thoughts, and then they translate them into technology commands that can be used across a wide range of home products. So, no more worrying if you've left the stove on. You can turn it off simply by thinking about it. So an OCD person's dream, that's me. And this was really cool and convenient, but the only drawback of this technology is that it requires access to some pretty valuable data, and that is their customers' real-time thoughts. So it's a very tricky universe to navigate. And luckily, we have Darren, who is very close with the founders. So he's going to walk us through this company as it starts up and how it addresses some of its key decisions.
Great, yeah. So whenever Mindtech was starting up, the founders were so focused on their initial product that they didn't really allocate a lot of resources to all the other things that a company would need, such as payroll, hiring, IT purchase decisions. That made it tough because their teams were working in silos. They didn't really have a consistent process, to which they could address things. They didn't really have a consistent approach to how systems were provisioned, how accounts were provisioned. But they knew that in order to compete in this field, that they were going to have some sort of centralized view of their controls, their data, and configurations. So one of the most fundamental steps that Mindtech took initially was enabling AWS organizations. And organizations, even if you have one account, I'd recommend doing it. But even if you have, once you enable AWS organizations, it allows you to take those accounts that may have been started by different teams and assemble them into one single plane where you can kind of start to control all of those things at one time. And it's really, all of the AWS services are starting to integrate very closely with it in the year 2021. In 2077, it's already a completely fixed problem, so that's good. A key component of AWS organizations is an organizational unit. And an organizational unit is a collection of one or more accounts, and those are usually grouped by function. So you might have a non-prod environment or a prod environment or an administrative environment. You can kind of cut these up however you'd like, but AWS has a really great blog post on how you might structure these initially if you haven't set them up yet. So it's really a great part of the organization. Another really key part of the organizations is a service control policy. And this is a policy that applies to an organizational unit in its entirety and all the accounts within that organizational unit. So for example, if you had a very sensitive account, you would have a more restrictive service control policy on that organizational unit to prevent the wrong team from being able to affect resources in another account.
Wait. So is this like Jennifer from accounting will no longer have access to Mindtech's control panel?
Exactly.
Oh.
So once you've set those up, your organizational units, you're going to want to enable CloudTrail. And if you haven't done that, do that right now, because CloudTrail is so important. It is an audit log of all the actions that take place in your AWS account. And it's extremely important to have that information. So before organizations came along, this was a disparate process. Every account owner would have to set up CloudTrail by themselves and configure it to correctly send to the right place. So there was the possibility for misconfigurations and data not going in. Whenever you use organizations and you enable an organization-wide CloudTrail, all the accounts within that organization will send to a single place, which is usually the security team's account, in order to make sure there's full monitoring of the entire organization. Also, you would normally ingest these types of logs into your SIEM, something like Splunk, or you can ship them off to a third party for additional analysis.
Wow. I mean, this is exciting. I love seeing a company as it just starts out. So it sounds like Mindtech was steadily growing. The founders felt better now because they had implemented centralized governance. So Mindtech now had audit logs for all of their activities and actions across their accounts, and they were also able to implement security rules simultaneously across all of their relevant technology assets. So this is already way much more efficient. However, Mindtech is not immune from human error. Unfortunately, none of us are. And a group of developers shared the same credentials to a service account, and it was unclear who was actually making the changes to their cloud resources.
Sound familiar?
So now, to make matters worse, one of the developers accidentally committed those credentials to a public code sharing site, MindHub. So now their credentials were exposed, which created a risk, and they had to be rotated, which also lost time and productivity.
True story. A former coworker of mine committed a very sensitive file to a public code sharing website, and we never let them live it down, ever.
Oh, I mean, we all make mistakes, though. Some can be avoided. So. But this did expose a clear gap in MindTech's controls, and so how did they handle that, Darren?
Well, I'm going to tell you. So MindTech enabled AWS single sign-on. And so MindTech already had an identity provider that they used for their employees to gain access to the services they'd use on a daily basis. They spent a lot of time creating groupings and hierarchies within that existing identity provider. So whenever they hooked it up to AWS single sign-on, they were able to map those existing groups and hierarchies to accounts and permissions within AWS. So that meant not risking this synchronization falling out of sync. And before AWS single sign-on, employees were using shared accounts, and it was very hard to figure out who was doing what. But whenever you use single sign-on, the CloudTrail logs for all your actions actually show the username as it exists within your identity provider. So in many cases, this would be an email address. So there is much less ambiguity around who was doing what within the accounts.
Wait, so no more guessing which person whose name is admin accidentally broke the website?
Exactly. And as we talked about earlier, if MindTech used to be using users and roles and groups, now they had switched to single sign-on, which is a temporary role assumption, which has short-lived credentials. And by using short-lived credentials, it made it so that they could remove long-lived credentials and passwords from their existing accounts, which meant that they couldn't be exfiltrated or taken with them whenever they were offboarded. And also, whenever they were offboarded within the identity provider, it also meant that they were offboarded from AWS as well.
That sounds like another MindTech success. So now MindTech was using their identity provider to track the actions by individual users when they were accessing the different parts of AWS. So this by itself just gave them already increased security over their most valuable assets. So these are the assets that are containing their customer information. So their processes started to feel more effective and repeatable. So moving along that maturity scale. However, a recent wave of concerning events brought information security again to the forefront of mainstream media. All right, so there were a couple prominent news articles that came out regarding attacks on this type of data, so our actual thoughts and mind control. So the articles focused on seizures, which are criminal activity where hackers are stealing the actual thoughts directly from the minds of their victims. On top of this, there were several nation states that got caught by using mind control to spy on other countries. So all of this combined, several markets started to tighten the regulation around this technology and access to this data. So MindTech went and did a quick check, and it turns out that most of their customers, their customer contracts all exist within this newly regulated space. So let's see how they get compliant.
So MindTech needed to know if they were compliant with the new regulations in the market they were in. So they huddled with the GRC and legal teams, and they got a list of steps for how to become compliant. Unfortunately, the tough part was proving whether they had actually achieved that compliance level. MindTech's organic growth made it hard to account for all the different cloud resources being used across their ever-growing number of accounts. Some projects were abandoned but never deleted, and others grew beyond their initial scope. This is all very complicated to keep track of, and we need a way to inventory cloud assets across all accounts in order to properly secure it.
Wow, but I'm a little upset about this one because does that mean that your Internet Exposed Hackathon project was no longer going to exist?
No, delete that right now. So not being able to accurately speak to its environment can put MindTech at risk for not meeting new laws or for violating the terms of its existing customer contracts which deteriorates customer trust. You cannot secure what you don't know about. And so this is the one thing I'm going to ask audience participation for because it's very important. So if you'll say it along with me, you cannot
secure what you don't know about.
Thank you. So thankfully, AWS keeps up with regulations and has sets of controls called conformance packs. And these conformance packs are security controls that also potentially have a remediation action within them. So you can apply these conformance packs, think CIS. And speaking of, if you've ever had to apply a CIS benchmark and then gather the evidence for that benchmark, you might start to question the steps in life that brought you to this point. But thankfully, AWS Config makes it extremely easy to do that. And it saves a ton of developer time. And whenever you use the automatic remediation, it's perfect.
See, I love the words automatic remediation. And I think sometimes people get a little nervous talking to security or GRC folks, but I actually think you make my job in compliance so much easier.
I hope so. So Mindtech actually wanted to go above and beyond what the conformance packs actually supplied, so they built their own controls within AWS Lambda, which gave them additional peace of mind. In order to keep track of all their various cloud assets across their accounts, they relied on AWS Config, where they could enumerate and query all of those assets automatically, which included a history of configuration. So if someone were to deviate from that configuration, the security team might get an alert, so we can follow up on it.
Wow, another super positive progression. So having this inventory helped to manage cloud spend, but it also reduced the risk from abandoned or forgotten projects and their associated assets. So it was really helpful. And Mindtech was definitely shifting from surviving to thriving. So what do we do when we're thriving? We hire consultants. So that is what Mindtech did. And they started to work on a project. And this was the one time where, the first time that they were actually going to share some of their customer data with a third party. Did it, it went well, worked out great. They hired these guys back again 6 months later. So when they show up, it turns out that their access had actually never been removed. So this highlighted a gap in Mindtech's offboarding processes. Darren, what did they do?
I'll tell you. So Mindtech decided to turn on IAM Access Analyzer, which allowed them to review third-party entitlements to the resources like the contractors had access to, in order to make sure that only the people that needed access to those resources were given access to those resources. And they soon learned that IAM Access Analyzer discovered that they had a public S3 bucket with old documentation that was steering customers to the wrong information. So it can get very complicated in your S3 bucket with bucket policies, object ACLs. So IAM Access Analyzer figured it out, and they were able to switch it and redirect customers to the correct documentation. And so after training IAM Access Analyzer on CloudTrail data for 90 days, they actually found some places where they were able to reduce the number of permissions within the developer team.
Wow, so it sounds like they were able to almost right-size it, right? So the developers only had access to the actual actions they were using?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because that is the principle of least privilege. And of course, in order for a human or an information security team to determine the proper level of permissions to give any given role, very tedious work. So that's perfect for our IAM Access Analyzer to work for you.
Wow. Well, this was a really fun journey into the future, so I hope everyone's ready to come back. I'm amazed at watching Mindtech grow. It seems like they've changed so much from when we first saw them. I will say, though, this time travel has made me just a little bit tired.
Mindtech strikes again.
All right, so.
I can't believe this ride is over.
Yeah, I know. It is, though. But what we're going to do is let's just talk about maybe summarizing our key points. Is that good?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right, so first, it's really important to use your GRC programs to create a really strong foundation, and that's based on industry best practices that's going to allow you to implement your security controls. And it's really important once you have that in place to continue to intentionally think about how you can tailor those controls to continue to build and maintain your customer trust.
And to do this well, it's really important to think specifically of your product, your customer needs, your environmental factors, and your risk posture to make continuously proactive and strategic decisions around security.
Yep, and then third-party certifications will help you validate your controls in your environment as well as make conversations with your customers much easier.
And as we saw with Mindtech, as in real life, things change at a rapid pace, and no one is immune from human mistakes or errors. It's important to take security seriously and intentionally so you can build a reliable product and support your company's longevity.
Yep. And then working together will help make it easier to navigate these complex decisions.
And more enjoyable.
Hey! All right, thank you so much for being here with us today. Does anyone have any questions? Does everyone make it back from 2077?
Yeah. Mindtech, thought control.
Yeah, bring on the future. I don't know. I'm kind of okay to stay here for now.
Well, we'll be around. We're going to hang out here. Thank you for being such a great audience, and have a great rest of your reInvent.
Thank you.